We have now about 65% of the legal department are legal professionals that are not attorneys.
Interesting.
And so I have a deeper appreciation now for that. And I do think there is some challenges sometimes in whether, those legal professionals feel like they belong in a legal department.
Right.
I would say it's still a little bit of a challenge, but so I try to be a role model and remind them that, there's all kinds of experiences needed to run a department.
What skill set does the chief of staff to a chief legal officer of a major international corporation need? How do you build trust with a CLO? Cultivate the right culture within a large legal and compliance team. Today on The Abstract, I am joined by Zoe McMahon, VP of Legal Strategy and Operations and Chief of Staff to the Chief Legal Officer at HP Inc. HP, which I think many of you have heard of before, manufactures personal computers, printers, 3D printers, a variety of other technologies, and it is the second largest manufacturer of PCs in the world still. Zoe's been at HP for 30 years, where she's held a variety of positions of increasing responsibility, which we'll talk about, including acting as HP's head of trust and privacy for 8 years. She also spent a number of years working on social and environmental responsibility, including leading HP's Global Human Rights Office. She's a certified life coach. And interestingly, you hold a doctorate in environmental technology. That's a lot. What a career. Zoe, thank you for joining me today in person here at Legal Operators Summit by the Sea in La Jolla.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It certainly reads like a fascinating story.
Well, let's get into it. This is a pretty beautiful place to record a podcast. You started your career working on environmental issues. What got you interested in working on or around the environment?
Yeah, I think I was about 16. And I don't remember the exact moment, but at some point I had this in my mind that at some point in my future, I wanted to be in a position of some authority to make a decision about whether the company would be impacting the environment or not so much. And so I was like, I just want to find my way on the inside. I don't want to be an NGO. I don't want to be a government. I want to work on the inside in business, making a difference to the planet, essentially. And so I embarked on a first degree in environmental engineering, and then, as you said, I did a doctorate after that, and HP sponsored my doctorate, and I've been there ever since, 30 years. So, but yeah, passion for the environment was where it all started, for sure.
Was working on environmental issues in a corporation sort of an emerging field at the time, and did it emerge around you as you were building your career in this space? Usually what happens here, right, is, there's a lot of sort of activists and NGOs like you're referencing, and then policymakers get involved, and then companies realize like, hey, we might actually need to deal with this because regulations are affecting our day-to-day business operations.
Yeah, definitely. I was right at the beginning of that. Actually, I was one of the first students in the environmental engineering degree program that I did, and in the doctorate program. They were both really new at the time. And then I think the first person in HP in the UK, at least, to be hired with an environmental background. Prior to that, people had just kind of inherited a little bit of the job, like on the side. And so, yeah, I think at the time HP was sort of looking at, we can see this thing coming, and hired me to work on these issues, which were definitely new at the time. And that was, so it was good. I love building new things. So it was exciting.
That's kind of an interesting mindset to have. And I've done too, and I think we can talk about this when we talk about privacy and your work there, which is maybe the best place to be is in the company, as opposed to sort of outside advocating or outside reporting on it. I don't know, talk to us a little bit about that and how you reached that conclusion relatively early on in your education, it sounds like.
Yeah, it was always part of my vision was to drive change from within. I'm not sure where it came from, but it was definitely a conviction that I felt like you could really influence decision makers if you were kind of embedded with them,
right?
As opposed to complaining or creating like that tension. I think there's parts and places for everyone in this game, but the game I wanted to be in was like on the inside and really driving change and making a difference. And yeah, I guess I just figured that was the way that I could be the most useful on the topic. So yeah.
Yeah. It was early. And we could do a whole podcast on this sort of like supply chain issues, human rights work that you've done and did for HP. But tell me a little bit about resourcing to lead on that. Like, is that challenging to do? How did you get the sort of executive buy-in that you needed?
Yeah.
And then did you have to sort of show the end result? Like, look, we're going to get this good press if we do this? Or how does that happen in a large organization?
Yeah, I think HP's had such a long history of an attitude of responsibility, or corporate citizenship, it was called for a long time. And so I feel rather blessed to have worked with executives who cared about the issues, right? And who didn't need much convincing, right, to invest in doing the right thing. So perhaps I was fortunate in that way.
Yeah.
But in the supply chain issues, certainly the key, I think, to resourcing change in environmental or social responsibility was really to embed the process of the work right where it happens. So, for example, having an ethical sourcing team or a responsible sourcing team that sits on the side is one thing and it has to be resourced. But if you can embed with the procurement people who are working directly with the suppliers some accountability, you don't have to resource so much. You just integrate it into what they were doing. And so I found that in environmental and in human rights and in privacy, the real wins can come the deeper you can integrate responsibility for the topic into other people's jobs.
Is that just accountability, or is that like a culture shift or a mindset shift? I mean, I've got a lot of experience, say, working with product managers and how they're using data around privacy. I always tried to think about it less from an enforcement perspective and more from if you believe in this and we agree that this is the philosophy and this is the sort of long-term ambition that the business has, these are the decisions that we should make.
Yeah.
How do you think about that interplay?
Yeah, so I think it was, we talked often in the early days of environmental of combining two things, a kind of business case and more of an emotional case of being the right thing to do. And depending on who you were talking to, the person would kind of either lean more towards the business motive or the kind of right to do thing motive. And so knowing what was going to motivate the person was really how I always rolled. And I think there's a broader aspect to that, which is, if you're talking to marketing people, you know how to motivate marketing people, right? If you're talking to procurement people, it's to lower your spend costs. If you're talking to, sales, it's another different thing. So I always just basically translated my agenda, no matter what change I was trying to drive, into the sort of dictionary and the culture of the team that I was working with. And I think that's a very effective way to drive behavioral change in organizations, no matter what you're talking about.
What was it that led you into privacy? Like, was privacy super interesting at the time? Was that an emerging field too?
No, well, maybe, but I don't think that's how it happened for me. At the time I was leading HP's Human Rights Office. And so I'd been exposed to some really interesting dilemmas around the intersection between technology and society and people's rights. And obviously privacy is kind of part of that, and data protection is very tied to, freedom, various rights and freedoms. And so I was kind of aware of it on the side. The chief privacy officer was my peer. And I don't know, I think I was just looking for my next career move, and it looked kind of curious. And so I raised my hand and I said, if ever there's a chance, I'm curious about that thing over there. And 6 months later, HP separated into two companies. And they said, you want the privacy thing? And I'm like, sure. Zero background, apart from a background in leadership and compliance, but zero subject matter expertise. Went in as the CPO with no privacy background. So that was fun.
We have a lot in common. I mean, when I took on my first privacy job, I had I had some public policy experience. I don't want to overstate it, but I had no experience in privacy. Neither of us have a law degree either. Yeah, I mean, I'm curious if you've ever had challenges building credibility, given your background, given the lack of a JD. I think it's great that people can thrive in legal and legal adjacent professions and areas like privacy without a JD. That's one of the big things we talk about on this podcast. But I'm curious what your experience was like.
Yeah, for me, it was normal. At the time when, I view privacy and data protection essentially as a compliance function, I might call it something like that. And the job of that function is to take the law, which presumably someone else understands, right? Yeah, understand it, but then translate it into process and compliance and governance and education. And so that translation process for me is the most interesting part. And that's not a law degree thing. That's a business operational thing. It's a process issue. And a change management issue. And so I never felt disadvantaged or different because to me, the task wasn't lawyer work, right? It was something different. I think now in my role as chief of staff within the legal department, we have now about 65% of the legal department are legal professionals that are not attorneys.
Interesting.
And so I have a deeper appreciation now for that. And I do think there is some challenges sometimes in whether, those legal professionals feel like they belong in a legal department. I would say it's still a little bit of a challenge. But so I try to be a role model and remind them that, there's all kinds of experiences needed to run a department. Data analysts, project managers, compliance professionals, paralegals, all of the above, and lawyers as well to effectively advise the business and run compliance. So I didn't feel disadvantaged myself, but I try to be a role model to ensure that other people don't either, right?
Yes. And we are at a legal operators summit. What do you think folks without JDs sort of bring to the table on a legal team? And I'm curious how you think about hiring for or resourcing a legal team, because you've seen legal teams sort of like build out and grow up and go through transitions and have GCs who come in who have different perspectives. We'll talk about that too. What do you think that different folks bring to the table?
I mean, I feel like there's so many answers to that. Almost as many answers as there are people. Everybody's just got a different experience, different background, and they've chosen to maybe focus in on analytical skills or project management skills, like I said. And so I see legal, and in fact any department, but since I'm in legal, we'll talk about legal. I see legal like a big machine, and it consists of lots of different parts that need to flow together. And only some of those parts need lawyers to flow, right? And then there are other parts driving change, driving projects, driving analysis, whatever. And so all of those different people bring such amazing skill sets to the machine. And the machine doesn't work. Public policy analyst, your policy background. You don't need lawyers to do policy advocacy. You can, it's okay. But the machine works really well when it has a big diversity of professional skills in it, in my opinion.
You've worked in a lot of these high growth, when I say high growth, I mean the field is high growth, although you've had great personal growth too. Areas, environmental, ESG, supply chain, privacy and trust. I think one of the interesting things about your career trajectory and experience is that you haven't stayed in one. And I want to ask you about that, right? Like, have you ever worried or felt like, oh no, I'm like leaving this thing behind, say like right as I'm getting good at it, or privacy is about to blow up and now everybody wants to talk to me, but I've decided I want to go off and do something different. Like, talk to me about prioritizing, say, like curiosity over, I don't know, sticking with something that you're starting to get really good at. Which I admire, by the way, which I like. And I think that, I think that a lot of people should have careers that are like that.
I actually feel like I stuck around in some topics a fairly long time. My average career change is about 7 years, which these days is pretty long.
That's true, actually. Yes, people jump from company to company every 2 or 3 years.
There does come a time where I I feel like, yeah, it's time to do something a bit different. And I've always loved being at the beginning, right, of something, as you said. So I was right at the beginning of the environmental movement, and then in ethical sourcing, it was pretty early days in that. Privacy, early days, and I don't think I'm early days in legal operations, but there's some aspects to that. So I like solving problems. I like big challenges. I like making things bigger. And for something to be growing bigger, that it tends to be at the beginning, right? And so, and that scale moment of like building something new, and that excites me. And I think I often say that I've got a sick fascination with long-term change. So I love planting the seeds at the beginning, and then like 5 years later going, it's happening now.
Right.
So I've really enjoyed seeing organizational change over time and culture change on these big issues. It's been super fascinating. So I've never looked back. I've never regretted the change. Your question was about, I got that credibility, but then did I ever regret that or feel like I was losing expertise or something?
Yeah.
No, I've always really leaned on transferable skills across these roles.
Right.
Not domain expertise.
Yeah.
And I would give that advice to anybody watching. Like, you can change, but sell yourself on those transferable skills, your leadership, your team management, your, process management. And, at the end of the day, a lot of jobs are kind of similar at the high level. And so, people shouldn't feel limited by their past roles, in my opinion.
I think it's great advice. I mean, I worked for a GC at one point who said, I'd love to help take this company public, but then if I let us through an IPO with the CFO and et cetera, right? My first thought wouldn't be, how can I go find another company to take public? I would think to myself, I've done that, right? Likewise, if someone came along and said, we only want to hire you because you've taken a company public, you'd think like, well, that's not like, I'm not like a one-trick pony, right? Right. Like the same skills that I applied in that situation, I can apply in a lot of others. I think that's great advice.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting tension sometimes when leaders are hiring. The tendency is to look for someone who's already done the job. And that isn't always the right answer.
Yes.
Right? Because it doesn't allow for the kind of thing that I did, which is completely change in the middle, right? And so if they wanted a chief privacy officer that knew what they were doing, I wasn't the right person. But turns out it worked out quite well. So sometimes giving people a break, like that, is the best thing to do.
And you might see problems from a slightly different perspective because you haven't been sort of like in all the nuances of it for 15 years or 25 years. I think that's an undervalued, I don't know if it's a skill set, right? But like it's an undervalued perspective that people bring to bear when they might be looking at something with slightly fresh eyes.
Yeah, totally. It's, you have to, in hiring someone different like that, you're taking on a maybe 3 to 6 month knowledge ramp.
Sure.
But you're benefiting from a bunch of other skills and strengths and perspectives that you might not otherwise have got.
HP brought on a new chief legal officer about 1.5 years ago, and you took on a role as her chief of staff. Can you tell us what that role entails?
Yeah, I mean, everybody's chief of staff is a little bit of a different flavor depending on the leader. But in my case, a lot of my emphasis is around communications for her as an executive, as well as facilitating her team management and her internal all-employee meetings and team effectiveness. I drive culture programs at HP for legal, employee engagement and development. And then I also manage our legal operations team, which includes our budget and technology strategy and other things. And so it's a blended job across many different skill sets that, again, build on the things I did in the past, perhaps not in an obvious way, but I think it was kind of intuitive. But so it's a broad-ranging job. I summarize it as helping our legal department with engagement, efficiency, and effectiveness.
We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back in just a minute.
The abstract is brought to you by SpotDraft, an end-to-end contract lifecycle management system that helps high-performing legal teams become 10 times more efficient. If you spend hours every week drafting and reviewing contracts, worrying about being blindsided by renewals, or if you just want to streamline your contracting processes, SpotDraft is the right solution for you. From creating and managing templates and workflows, to tracking approvals, e-signing, and reporting via an AI-powered repository, SpotDraft helps you in every stage of your contracting. And because it should work where you work, it integrates with all the tools your business already uses. SpotDraft is the key that unlocks the potential of your legal team. Make your contracting easier today at SpotDraft.com.
Before the break, we were talking about taking on this new role as chief of staff to your CLO, Julie Jacobs. When Julie joined, you took on this role as chief of staff to her. I would think that to be effective in that role, you would really need her trust. It's not necessarily easy when you have an executive coming in and they're scaling up in the business, and then, you need to build trust with them. Talk to me a little bit about how you've built that with her.
Yeah, I mean, it's right. She was coming in from the outside into a new role as our CLO. And although I was in the legal department at the time, I was the head of trust and privacy then, I was ready for a change. And so, I raised my hand to her, and it became more obvious that it would be a good match because I'd been at the company for 28 years.
Right.
I've been in the legal department for 12 years. So I had some credibility and I had some network that I could utilize in serving her. But in some ways it was a leap of faith. I mean, she didn't know me. And so I think one of the other reasons maybe the trust was established quickly is I kind of showed her right from day one that, I was there for her. Mm-hmm. And I literally said that to her the first day I met her. I'm like, I'm not your problem. I'm here to support you. In any way you want, like, let's go. So, and I think actually I have a mantra, and I might have even started then, but I try to say to people, I want this to be the easiest meeting you've had all day.
I like that.
Yeah, and I think
talking about setting the tone.
Right, and I think I might have said that to her that day too. Like, you've had a whole day meeting your new staff.
Yeah.
I want this one to be the easiest one. And I think that established a kind of sense of like, okay, this is safe. This is someone who's not, self-obsessed or self-oriented or selfish, right? I'm here for her. And I think that's what helped.
I mean, another side of that is to be an effective chief of staff. I think you need to be seen as a sort of honest broker, and you need the trust of the rest of the team as well. Mm-hmm. You can't just be sort of the person who's executing on everything the boss is saying, right? Talk about how you've maintained, I guess, the trust that you built over 28 years at HP before taking on this role. Yeah,
I mean, I pride myself in being very relationship oriented. And so I think that's key to this role in Chief of Staff, is to really focus on building and maintaining relationships at every level of the organization. Mm-hmm. So, among Julie's leadership team, that's really important. Mm-hmm. But also not just them, also, influences in the organization, all members of staff in the organization. And one of the things I like to think about is engagement as a process, not an outcome, right? So we often talk about employee engagement or engagement of teams, and as though engagement is the outcome. But engagement is a process. It's a continued process of interaction, listening, communicating. And I think that's how I maintain that trust over time, is just continually listening, continually being relationship oriented, and also saying that thing of like making this the easiest thing they've had all day. I think that helps too, right?
Yeah, I like that. Like an ENPS score is not really, that's not the driver necessarily, right? It's, you think that employee engagement is something that you have to sort of cultivate over time. And then the benefit is not the score. The benefit is like the business is running really well and the teams are happy and the people are doing great productive work. Yeah. And it requires you to engage. Right. That's the thing. Yeah. It's not like, let's do all this abstract stuff to drive engagement. Engagement is engaging. Yeah. Right? And that's what I mean by it being a process. So really working with people, listening, engaging,
right? That's how we maintain relationships in the work. And I'm a passionate believer in work depending on meaningful relationships. And so, yeah, that's like a huge obsession of mine. So I think that helps.
Yeah. Meaningful relationships at work. One of the things that we heard about today here at the conference is this sort of idea of untold stories, that people may have a variety of sort of stories in their lives or parts of their lives that are not showing up at work, or that they actually may be sort of hiding. They may be putting on a little bit of a veneer, right, when they come to work. And I understand how, from time to time, right, like you don't need to bring all of yourself to work all the time, right? But I do think that I like the talk that we heard, and I do think that it's nice to think about how we might actually tell some of these untold stories to our coworkers so we have real relationships like you're talking about. With that in mind, what do people not know about you?
For someone that has been at the company for 30 years, I'm a VP, I'm an executive, I'm successful, but I'm human, right? And I think, we all have, or I'm going to speculate that many of us have self-doubt at times or nervousness about situations. And I'll give you an example for me that's very real right now. I care a lot about mindfulness practice, and I think it's a little bit missing in the workplace, sort of recognizing, just a little bit of calm. But to actually speak up and say that to people at work without them going, are you crazy? There's a little bit of like trepidation about it. But, I have seen by experimenting a little bit, by being brave and sort of dropping it in from time to time, like I've seen people respond and be, oh yeah, I like that too. And I think sometimes when people are brave and they bring perhaps an aspect that they care about into workplace, it liberates other people to do the same thing, as you were just saying in this untold stories case. And I think that's a really good thing, to bring our humanity.
Yes.
And particularly if we can be more respectful, more gracious to each other, bring ease. There is so much stress in a legal department. As we've heard at this conference, the demand for legal work is growing. The budgets are shrinking.
Yep.
There's not enough bodies you can throw at the problem. So along with efficiencies and skills and technology to drive those improvements, we have to have some corresponding empathy for each other as well.
Sure.
And so I think if we can all just take it down a notch and be nice to each other. I'm a big proponent of that. And maybe some might think it's a bit Pollyanna, but that's my story to bring. So
are there ways, I would imagine, even well before this conference, you've been trying to do this or build this sort of culture at HP, even before this role, probably. Are there ways that you try to sort of coax those stories out of others or out of people who are reporting into you or working on your teams so they feel a little more comfortable at work?
Yeah, I would say I am an authentic leader that's not shy about telling my stories. But I think in terms of coaxing it out of other people, that's a lot about asking questions. Not nosy questions, but curious questions, simple questions like, how are you? Simple things like that, which just taking a few minutes to check in, you can learn a lot about a frame of mind that someone's coming to a situation with. And so, I definitely encourage those kinds of check-ins. And I do that in both, management contexts, but also in inspiring other leaders and as we work as a leadership team as well. So I try to do my part both as a fellow leader and also as a leader of people.
Last substantive question for you before we get to a few fun ones. When you think about the culture of HP's legal org, which you've been a part of for many years, what are you most proud of And maybe in this role, what are you most looking forward to working on or building?
I think in this role I've had for the last sort of almost 2 years working with Julie, I think the thing that I'm most proud of is really helping her create the vision that she has for the team, which is around really supporting the company's vision and strategy. Julie is incredibly business focused. It's very inspiring. And I think bringing the team along with her priorities on that and constantly communicating about it has been, I'm just really proud that the team has embraced her style and vision around that. So that's been really fun. I think where we're still focused, it's something we have to cultivate on an ongoing basis, is just our collaboration as a team, showing up as one team, avoiding things like advice shopping from the business. That happens.
No.
So a little bit of that, and really just, developing the kind of culture where those silos are broken down among the different parts of legal, that we rely on each other, that we trust each other, that we're a high-performing team in a large organization. This doesn't happen by accident.
Yeah.
And so I'm excited about continuing to work on that part of it. If you think about what we've heard today about the demand on the legal department versus the resources of the legal department, the advancements in technology, but we can't throw too many people at the problem, as well as all the things that we're doing to drive efficiency and technology adoption. I think we got to work in parallel on being together as people and having the culture and the teamwork, because that's what's going to help in the end, right? In these difficult times. So that excites me, to complement the transformation that we're all going through in the industry with the people part of it.
I love that what is most exciting to you is a real challenge, not this one thing that we're going to do for the next 3 months and then it'll have a shiny bow on it.
Yeah.
That's great.
Well, like I said before, I kind of have a sick fascination with long-term change. And so I'm all in.
Okay. Some fun questions for you now, Zoe. Your favorite part of your day today?
I love driving effective communications. I think communication is so important to alignment as a team and inspiring around a vision. And so a big part of my job is enabling the communications across the legal department. And I love working on that. So that's the fun part.
How about a professional pet peeve?
Yeah, it's probably says more of my weaknesses than anything else. But the one thing that really frustrates me is kind of people pushing work around. Sort of email chains where if somebody on the way had just read further down, it could have ended 3 sessions ago, kind of thing. So I like it when people really dig in, take accountability, drive something forward. If they're going to touch it, try to finish it. As opposed to like, it's not me, I'll pass it on. So accountability, and also kind of slowing down to go faster. I think we've all got so many things flowing through our email box, and it's sort of related to the same thing, right? Don't just go fast, look at it, go deep, think about it, go slow, solve it, and then move it on. So slow down to go faster and take accountability.
I like that. I like to ask our guests if they have a book recommendation for our audience. I also take a lot of these on airplanes with me and read them. And I'm always looking for good books to read. This could be something you've read recently or something that was really important to you in your career.
Yeah.
Or just a good book.
There are 2 books that I find myself recommending all the time. One is a book called Principles by Ray Dalio.
Oh, yes. I've read that one.
Now, it's not a beach read.
Yeah.
It's more of a reference text. But I do find that just the principles approach and some of the insights that he's generated just super fascinating. So again, it's not a novel or anything, but it's one I recommend a lot. And it's where the ideas of meaningful relationships kind of came from for me. So another one that I think people forget about, it's The First 90 Days.
Okay.
It's by something like Michael or David Watkins, something like that.
We'll find it for the show notes.
Yeah, I did. I don't even remember exactly, but it's about transitions. So like you take a new job or your boss changes. Typically when people think about their first 90 days, it's when they're first taking on a job and they're trying to like navigate that first period. But what this book does is it reminds you that transitions are happening all the time. So like you could have a new team member, you could have a new boss, the company direction could change. Anytime there's a transition like that, it's time to kind of hit the reset button and apply a little bit of methodological thinking around, all right, we're back in, I'm kind of back in the first 90 days again. And that's the time to reset expectations with those around you and communication patterns. And so I like that book. I think it helps people navigate those transitions, be it a new job or a new boss or something like that. So that's another one that always trips off my tongue as well. I just don't know who wrote it.
That's all right. We will find that for the audience. And
Thanks.
that's a really interesting approach. I'm already thinking about ways that I might be able to apply that in my day-to-day. Okay, last question for you. My sort of traditional closing question for my guests. Well, you'll have to ask the other guests once you've heard it. It's if you could look back on your early days, maybe at HP, just getting started, something that you know now that you wish that you'd known back then.
Yeah, I think I've talked a lot about relationships today, and I think it's very much who I am. I don't know if that was always true. So I would say, looking back at the very early Zoe at 30 years ago in HP, I can't believe it's been that long. But I would probably just say that relationships matter. You know, behind every decision is a person, behind, every problem is a person. And so navigating the good times and the bad in companies is all about your relationships with other people. And I don't know if I fully knew that when I started. So my wiser, older self would tell me to focus on relationships.
Great answer. Will fit well in with all the other ones over the episodes. Zoe, thank you so much for joining me for this episode of The Abstract here in La Jolla at the Legal Operators Summit by the Sea.
Yeah, you're very welcome. It was fun chatting, and I hope the readers get something useful out of my little career journey that I had at HP.
I'm sure they will.
Yeah.
And to all of our listeners, thanks so much for tuning into this episode, and we hope to see you next time.